Is going on. There's been a lot of exciting things happening in recent events. In particular, the Democratic primary win of Zohran Mamdani.
The name is Mamdani, M-A-M-D-A-N-I.
You might be wondering why, if a channel that's kind of focused on diaspora issues and black people issues would be worrying about a Indian Muslim guy from New York. But the interesting thing about Zohran Mamdani is that he's actually from Uganda. And I think it kind of highlights one of the great things about East Africa, that there's so many different cultures here. There's such a melting pot of people, even though it's in Africa. You almost kind of have like an African Europe or an African United States amongst the countries in East Africa. And a lot of interesting politicians have come out of East Africa and had some success in the United States. So what is it about East Africa that makes people like this a little bit more common than, say, other parts of the continent? And you might be saying, oh, well, if East Africa was so great, then, why are they emigrating? That, in my opinion, is a completely different conversation, especially considering that myself and other African Americans are coming to the continent to pursue our own dreams and hopes. But for starters, in 2023 and 2024, East Africa registered the highest economic growth in all regions in Africa, with about 5%. Specifically, Rwanda had the highest growth of 7% in 2024. Another great thing about East Africa, specifically Kenya, which is another reason why I picked it, is that it's very close to surpassing Ethiopia's GDP. And actually right now, between all the countries in East Africa, Kenya and Ethiopia form about 55% of the region's GDP. Another one of the reasons that East Africa has been fairly successful is that none of the countries in East Africa have really kind of picked a side in the global great game between the United States, Europe, Russia, and China.
Now, Prime Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Secretary for Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, Musalia Mudavadi, is attending the 19th Non-Aligned Movement Summit in Uganda. The 19th Non-Aligned Movement Summit, NAM, under the theme Deepening Cooperation for Shared Global Affluence, is poised to provide a unique opportunity for member states to take stock of major global affairs. The 5-day-long summit is the largest grouping of states worldwide after the UN, with 120 member states, 18 observer nations, and 10 organizations. The NAM Summit is held every few years, usually in a different continent. The last meeting was held in Baku, Azerbaijan last year, with the theme Upholding the Bandung Principles to ensure concerted and adequate response to the challenges of the contemporary world.
They've all kind of been able to work well with all the countries. If you ever come to Kenya, you'll notice that there's Chinese merchants and Chinese shops everywhere. But at the same time, Kenya is what's called an MNNA, which is a major non-NATO US ally. It's very closely tied to the United States, and it has access to technology and equipment and services, and can provide services to the United States that other countries, not just in Africa, but in the world, can't. It's literally on par with, say, France or Germany when it comes to the military relationship between the United States and Kenya. Additionally, the East African community has grown substantially in the last couple of years. And there's been a lot of talk of integrating all of the countries in the Horn, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Somaliland, Uganda, all of them into one economic bloc. You're looking at an economic group that has 800 million people in it. So this kind of explains why East Africa has a lot of potential, and it produces people with a lot of potential, specifically people like Zohran Mamdani. So getting back to Zohran. Zohran was born in Kampala, Uganda in 1991. Little known fact, Zohran's middle name is Kwame, which is named after Kwame Nkrumah, one of the revolutionary leaders in Ghana's independence fight. So Zohran made his way to the United States, gets his citizenship, and by 2018, he's the first Ugandan in the New York State Assembly, the first South Asian in the New York State Assembly, which is crazy considering the number of Indians that live in New York City. And he's only one of 3 Muslims who have ever been in the New York State Assembly. And now he's on the precipice of becoming the, chief executive officer of the most populous, richest city in the United States, arguably one of the most important cities in the world. And then again, he's not the only person of East African origins who has come to the United States and found a successful political career. You've got Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, and Joe Neguse, who is actually born in the United States, but his parents were from Eritrea. And he's actually the first black congressman from Colorado. So a lot of cool stuff coming from people in East Africa. I want to get back to the focus on why East Africa is producing people like this who have so much energy, who have so much ambition, and why I think it's a good spot for African Americans. So East Africa has the youngest average population in the world, with the average age being under 20. That means that you've got a whole region that is going to be getting older and going through all of the steps of life. You hear a lot in Kenya about, Gen Z this and Gen Z that. It's not a joke. Like, they're really young. Like, there's a lot of young people in Kenya and East Africa in general. They're just chomping at the bits to make a dent in the world. And if African Americans come here and build businesses and can tap into that energy, I think the potential is, quite frankly, limitless.
In 2022, most Gen Zs were too young to vote. But by 2027, 14 million Gen Zs will be eligible to vote, a massive increase of 79%. Back in 2022, youth aged between 18 and 34 made a total of 8.8 million of registered voters, accounting for 40% of Kenya's total voter base. Right now, Gen Z is aged between 13 and 28 years. This means millions will be ready to vote in 2027. The total number of youth voters is expected to hit 70 million, forming the largest and possibly most influential voting bloc in the country. This generation isn't just big in numbers. They have led protests, mobilized online, and called out for accountability.
Another thing about East Africa that's kind of different from the rest of the continent is that the region has a much more diverse economy than many of the other regions. For example, a large chunk of economies of other African countries is agricultural, but almost half of the regional GDP is in the service sector in East Africa. Another big part is that the strategic location of the East African area, right? We do have what's going on between Iran and Israel, and Kenya, Eritrea, Djibouti. If you know anything about Djibouti, there's tons of military bases there. Kenya's got a military base, a US military base. There's a strategic incentive to have control over the Horn of Africa. Mombasa is the biggest port in East Africa. Like, this is an important region of the world. A little bit more so in an international or global sense than a comparable area like Nigeria in, West Africa. Like, north of Nigeria, you've got Africa. South of Nigeria, you've got Africa, right? Not to make fun of West Africans, but they're kind of just around other Africans. Whereas in East Africa, it's right on a major trade route. And, there's a lot of history if you understand, like things like the Swahili traders, the Arab traders that have been here. Like, it's a very strategic area of the world. Almost forgot natural resources. Like, they just found a whole bunch of oil off the coast of Somalia. Like, the area is going to be very important in the next coming years. So the idea of African Americans coming here, especially if you're like me and you work in tech and you want to build tech-focused businesses, you've got this young population that love using technology and are technically literate. So really, East Africa offers a huge opportunity for African Americans and other members of the diaspora who want to kind of get connected to the lost roots that we've had on the continent and get away from some of the chaos that's starting to show up in the West. Being honest, Kenya has its own problems. There's been protests in the streets. Uganda's still been under Museveni for who knows how long. And Tanzania has had, it's still Tanzania. But again, all of that just means that there's a lot more opportunity for growth and to have a greater impact in the region. Personally, I think that there's going to be a lot more East African descended persons having a greater impact in the West, right? Like, you think about Barack Obama. Barack Obama is probably the most famous East African descended person in the world. And he was president of the United States. His dad was Luo from Kenya. Then you also have people like Lupita Nyong'o. Like, East Africans have a global impact that people kind of don't think about or see because they don't wear their Africanness on their sleeves as much as someone else might. And that's not to say that they are westernized, but there's a lot more adaptability to Western sensibilities and Western business practices and cultural practices here. Like English penetration in Kenya and Uganda is really good. I know, like in my travels, I pretty much spend most of my time between the United States, Kenya, and the Dominican Republic. And the number of people who live in Kenya and speak English that I've been able to like easily communicate with far outpaces the number of folks in the Dominican Republic that speak English. If you're gonna pick a region to come to, me personally, I say why not East Africa? Appreciate you taking the time with me today to talk about some of the great things about East Africa and Kenya in general. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. The next video that I'm putting out will be right here. So have a good day and make sure to come back next time.